Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm here to do a 2-for-1 tag. Figure if I'm gonna, take a long time to do these videos lately, I'll put my back into it. And I have the page 112 tag and the Try a Chapter tag. The page 112 tag was started by Sean the Book Maniac. It was based off of a French prize where they make up a short list for an award based off of the writing on page 112. And I've been using it all year to pit books against each other that have been on my Goodreads TBR forever, and I'll read one and then discard the other. And usually the books that I'm picking from are Jewish-themed literary fiction, and that is the case today as well with these two titles. The Try a Chapter tag I actually came to know through Jen Campbell's adaptation of it, with the Try a Short Story tag that she started a couple of years ago, and I myself have done the Short Story tag a couple of years now. I don't think I've ever actually done the Try a Chapter tag before, but I'll leave the creator information that I can find down below. And I am returning to a bunch, an oodle of stuff that I got from San Diego Comic-Con back in July, and making good on actually doing something with all this free stuff I dragged back home. And I have this sampler from Penguin Teen. It is a Fall into Fantasy, and it is 6 titles, these 6 titles, of popular YA fantasy novels. I've read one of them, An Ember in the Ashes, and part of another one. I don't think I'll actually read the whole full book of any of them. I'm not sure, other than the Ember in the Ashes series. I'm definitely reading those. I like YA fantasy enough to be interested in the top books that I hear about on the YA BookTube channel, so I thought it'd be a nice chance to give these chapters a try. And mashing these 2 tags into one, it made me think about how each tag is good for its specific genre. Like the page 112 tag is focused on quality writing, and that's really what literary fiction is all about. Well, I mean, I'm mostly into it for the themes and the characters, but because the plot isn't always as important, and it's not supposed to be a grab-you-by-the-throat sort of experience, they're really trying to get to you through the quality of the writing and what they make you think about, and that more introspective way. So the page 112 tag is really ideal for literary fiction, I believe, whereas the Try a Chapter tag seems like it would be great for YA fantasy and really any genre literature, I would think, where it's more of a progressive journey. At least that's how I approach a lot of genre fiction. It's less easy to get into in the middle. It's more about the journey along the way, and the build-up is what gets you interested in the story, so hence pitting books against each other by their first chapter in this genre seems appropriate. But I'll start with the page 112 tag, starting with this book. This is The Tin Horse by Janice Steinberg. I always want to say house, but it's horse. His uncharacteristic anger made me think twice before approaching him, but I wanted to learn to swim. Papa? I moved toward him as he dried himself with the towel. Papa? Maybe he heard my voice tremble, or he'd worn his anger out. What is it, Elaine? He asked gently. You said you'd teach me to swim. He hesitated a moment, and I braced myself for a no, but he smiled. That's right, I did. As a swimming instructor, Papa was more patient than when he drilled me in poetry or history. He made a game out of putting our faces in the water and blowing bubbles. That first day, I went from blowing bubbles with Papa holding me to not being held at all. Soon he taught me how to do a dead man's float, and by the time I was 6, I could swim the crawl. As I got a bit older, I sometimes swam out beyond the breakers with Papa, and as the tendrils of mature reasoning I'd first noticed that day on the beach grew, I realized that the key to the conversation that had baffled me was Uncle Harry's 42-minute mile, swum when he was 17, and that Harry's ghost stroked always a little ahead when Papa swam his mile. And then there's a break. A framed photograph of Harry Greenstein, handsome as a movie actor in his army uniform, hung in our living room. He was also in another living room photo, a picture of Papa's whole family taken in 1911, the year after they moved from New York to the more healthful climate of Los Angeles. They made the move because our Bubby suffered from tuberculosis, but the change came too late for her. Seated beside Zadie at the center of the family grouping, Bubby looked chalky and frail, and I knew she had died the next year. But the children! Impossible to believe that my pale, dull-eyed Bubby had ever produced those tanned visions of vitality. Chubby and smiling, in dark dresses with white lace collars, 9-year-old Sonia and 8-year-old Pearl flanked the group. Bill, that was Papa, who was 11, stood ramrod straight behind Bubby. In his serious demeanor, I came to recognize myself. So this seems like a standard family drama that I read about. We have sort of multi-generations of a Jewish family in the 20th century. I thought it was relatively strong. There was one sort of weirdly worded sentence that took me a bit to get through about tendrils of mature reasoning and baffled by Uncle Harry, which through the section seemed to imply that Papa might have lived in his brother's shadow a little bit, perhaps. I don't know, and I saw how it was a sort of a weird transition of moving. Like we start with this image of the recalcitrant daughter going to her maybe explosive father to ask to learn how to swim, and then it's like, then I'm 6, and then I'm older, and then I know how to do all these things. So I don't know, it was I don't know, it felt like a weird transition of time, but it might have just been when I popped into the story. But otherwise, I mean, it seems interesting enough. And next I'll read from Breaking and Entering by Eileen Pollock. I think I'll read a little longer than just one page until a break in the action, because I wanna. Molly tugs at her sleeve. Em did this thing with cards. She says I'm going to have a lot of... She turns to Em for prompting. A lot of upheavals. But they'll make me a better person. She saw a fire in my future. Louise holds the same opinion of fortune-telling that most rational people do. She can't imagine a pack of cards revealing anything about anyone else's future, but is eager to hear what they reveal about her own. The fire Em has glimpsed in Molly's future obviously is a reference to the fire in Richard's past, but Louise is still impressed. She hasn't told Em about Molly's father setting fire to those trees. I hope you don't mind, Em says. Most of our neighbors think tarot is Satan's gift, but I thought, because you were Jewish, it came out sounding like Jew-witch, you might be more open-minded. Wary of correcting everyone as to her religious affiliation, Louise tells Em she doesn't object to anyone telling Molly's fortune so long as it doesn't upset her. You mean that? Em says. I don't suppose I could interest you in coming to a coven. She blinks a long, slow blink. We don't sit around stirring cauldrons or sacrificing babies or anything like that. Sometimes there's a little spell casting, but real witches never cast a spell that has an evil intent. As with fortune-telling, Louise is dubious about the efficacy of casting spells, yet anxious to try it. I don't think I'm cut out to be a witch, but it might be fun to watch a meeting. Em smiles a crinkly smile that indicates she takes Louise's inability to even say the word coven as a sign she has little future as a witch. But Em seems to appreciate her neighbor's tolerance. On the way home, Molly skips ahead a few yards and then waits for her mother to catch up. Em can talk to birds, she says. She understands what they want. She can kind of read their minds. Who is Louise to dismiss the possibility that a person who spends nearly all of her time with birds can guess what they might be thinking? Maybe Americans in the heartland have never been quite as down-to-earth as the national myths might indicate. Unless you consider it down to earth to fill barrels with manure and explode them for fun. I really like that ending. It's quite comedic. It's like, where'd this come from out of left field? So yeah, I find this to be an interesting exchange between these two women in the heartland of minority religions, it seems. We have a witch and a Jew, and one of their daughters, and I don't know, it's pretty low-key, but at the same time, there seems to be something more unique happening here than so much of the Jewish fiction I read, which is supposed to be like multi-generational and epic, and sort of every page kind of makes you think of that, like this is just one cog in the picture. But a lot of this page to me seems very present, like really the action of the story is in the here and now, and not so much in how it, you know, transcends into the past or the future. And then I'll go into the fact that I know a little bit more about the books than I've read. I mean, I know their sort of flaps and their backs, their promotional material from when I put them on my TBR, and I put this one on my TBR because several years back Eileen Pollock came to the local JCC to tout another book, and so I was interested in her fiction. And this one in particular is about a very specific time and place, so I will read from the flap. It's 1995 and Louise Shapiro has left California to start a new life in rural Michigan with her husband Richard and their daughter Molly. Within weeks, an explosion destroys the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, leaving innocent civilians dead and maimed. As the accusations and conspiracy theories proliferate about Arabs, Jews, Christians, the FBI, the government, Louise discovers startling secrets about her neighbors, her colleagues, and even her own husband. Can she live in a town where most of the residents are members of the Michigan militia? Can she work at a school where her students consider homosexuality the work of Satan? Whom can she trust? M, the local Wiccan? The charismatic Unitarian minister Ames Y? Her troubled student Parker Rosencrantz? Breaking and Entering is a touching, intelligent, beautiful, and witty examination of the moment in this country when things changed, when we suddenly felt vulnerable in ways we never had before, when a great divide began to separate red and blue states. So yeah, this is a little bit bigger than one specific family. This seems to be touching a cultural moment in American history. So I think I've made it clear that I'm going to go with this book. I also read the flap of the other book, and it is as I thought, you know, a multi-generational Jewish story talking about the specific family, and I'm sure it would be great, but I think this one is calling out to me a little bit more. Okay, and from here I'm going to go away and come back and report on the 6 stories in this little collection, starting with the one I've already read, An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. And I'm back to talk about An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. Technically it was 4 chapters, not 1 chapter. They're doing about like 40-ish pages, I guess, for each segment, so whatever covers that. And the chapters move very quick. Unlike any of the other books, I've read all of the books published so far in the series, so I've read up to book 3, and we're in a very different place in book 3 than we are in book 1. So it was a nostalgic feeling to go back. I feel like this is some of the weaker part of the story. It's really just the setup, you know, the magical intrigue stuff is much more complicated and alluring later on, but you know, you always need a setup. Like, very quickly we meet Laia, whose life is completely upended. Her family is killed, her home is destroyed, and she has to go find the Scholar Resistance to save her brother. And then Elias is a little slower, but still there's high stakes. He's about to graduate, he wants to desert, but we immediately see that the price of desertion is to be whipped to death. And so the stakes are really high, and within this sort of high action, Tahir does get in a lot of world building. We learn about the oppressive Martian Empire, we learn about the scholars who used to be scholars but now are very much living under the boot of the Martial Empire and are ignorant at best and slaves at worst. So I feel like she gets in a lot of world building and you know, high stakes for characters, and you know, I'm just biased by how much I love this series. I would definitely recommend it. And next I will read the section of The Flame in the Mist by Renee Adier. And I'm back, a little later than I had hoped, but better late than never, right? And I'm here to talk about the section of The Flame in the Mist by Renee Adier that I read. We start with this prologue where a boy's father is executed and he vows revenge, and then we skip forward some years to the character of Mariko. She's a young, well-to-do girl traveling through her empire to make an advantageous marriage when she is attacked by this group of people called the Black Clan, and all of her party is killed and she's able to escape. And it turns into this adventure romp of her on her own for the first time in her life, trying to figure out who wants to kill her and why, and taking control of her own destiny. It's one of those stories where a woman is shunted into a marriage and that's not necessarily how she wants to play out her life, and now she gets this chance to be a bit more proactive. There's samurai references and I believe Japanese references. Granted, I don't have a lot of knowledge in this field, but in terms of world building it was a lot more vague than Saba Tahir's in the last section. And I don't know, you know, this whole strong female character being, you know, the badass thing, that's sort of one of my pet peeves. I mean, even at the end of the section it says Hattori Mariko was not just any girl, she was more, and I'm like, and I don't really think Ade meant anything horrible by that, but you know, it's that stereotype of, you know, the badass girl is the girl worth following, and this is not generally the type of story that interests me, but you can tell it packs a punch. I'm sure it would get some people going right from the start to figure out what's going on and to follow her on her adventure. But meanwhile, I'm on to the next section, which is Rebel in the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton. Okay, just finished The Rebel in the Sands, 3 chapters. I remember a couple of years ago when I was at Comic-Con, I got like a small little pamphlet of the first chapter, and I wasn't too impressed, but I'm feeling a little bit more generous now. Anyway, this story takes place in a Middle Eastern-inspired kingdom, and we start with our main character, Amina. She's dressed up as a boy and trying to win at a shooting contest because she's trying to run away from home and, you know, get the prize money, but, you know, things go wrong because of greed and, you know, rigged rules and all of that and general violence of the game. And then we follow her back home to where she's living with her aunt and uncle and get a lot about her backstory, about how her mother was hanged for killing her not father because she'd actually married this drunken man to hide the fact that she had been impregnated by an occupying soldier. And she's living with her aunt and her uncle wants to marry her because it's sort of, you know, it's a polygamous culture, and you know, he's seeing somebody eating at his table and he feels like, well, maybe I should just, you know, make her another wife. And, you know, that he seems like the stereotypical lecherous man, and her aunt is just supremely jealous and kind of treating her like Cinderella, it seems. And meanwhile, on top of all of that, we're getting a little bit into the politics of the kingdom, like about this occupying army, and there's a sultan who brought the occupying army in to win his throne, and there's a rebel prince, and so, you know, rebellion is in the air, and it seems like, I don't know, maybe I'm guessing off of the other titles of the book, it seems like Amina is going to get involved in all that, perhaps, and there's other new characters, and we even get some references to fantastical creatures, like jinn and ghouls, you know, things that make this fantasy, so, I mean, it's intriguing. That stuff, backstory stuff, is kind of intriguing, but it isn't really built up enough yet, but, you know, that's okay, because we're only 3 chapters in and getting into Amina's life, so I mean, yeah, it sounds a little bit interesting, but the whole idea of the, you know, rebel savior always makes me a little iffy, and Amina might be a little bit too perfect, you know, with being such a great shot, but, you know, who knows, maybe I'll find some flaws in her and she'll seem more like a multifaceted character, so I guess I would say this series is slightly intriguing, but not as much as Ember in the Ashes. Anyway, now I am off to read Reign of the Fallen by Sarah Glenn Marsh. And I'm back. More time has passed again, but that's life, and I'm now here to talk about Reign of the Fallen by Sarah Glenn Marsh. We start out with a rather compelling sentence. Today, for the 2nd time in my life, I killed King Wilding. So this story comes out of the gate with the fantastical elements. We are in another epic fantasy kingdom, but this one is ruled by dead kings and queens, or at least a dead king, who has to be killed and then brought back to life every time he's about to turn into a shade and, you know, I guess forget himself as a human and turn violent. And so we are told this story by the point of view of a necromancer, and they're about to go and get King Wildling back from the lands of the dead, as it were, and they have a princess with them who is his link to the world, so they need her in this afterlife to bring him back, but the necromancers kind of open the gate. There's 2 necromancers. We're being in the POV of the girl, and she has a male partner, you know, they have a plucky romance going on, you know, all within the first chapter. But also within these first chapters, immediately we get this big murder mystery happening, and this sudden complication in what was supposed to be a routine grab the dead spirit and bring him back to his body to rule again. So, yeah, I can't help but think to myself, in terms of the world building, what I hope she might get to later is why this kingdom is so cool with the idea of the dead ruling over them. Why can't they just let life take its course and, you know, have the descendants take over when people die? But I don't know if that's because it's just cooler this way, or if there's going to be a more legitimate reason. It's not in the first 3 chapters. But I do appreciate at least that we get into the fact that traveling to the afterworld has a cost for people, both for necromancers and for the regular living people who they take with them. So huzzah, magic with consequences. I'm not sure that reading about necromancy would be my thing, but I think there's some creativity to this storyline so far. But now I'm off to read a segment of Seafire by Natalie C. Parker, which was an advanced reader segment when I got this booklet in July, but now it just came out very recently in the fall. I'll be back. Hello again. I've just read Seafire, the first 3 chapters by Natalie C. Parker, and also the prologue of this all-girls pirate tale. It kind of reminds me of the synopsis of Sasha Alsberg's and Lindsay Cummings' book Zenith, except that their all-girls pirate ship is in space, and this one is on the 7 seas, or, well, actually it's a fantasy world, so I don't know how many seas. But anyway, the prologue starts with our main character's family and her. They're living on this pirate ship, living in illegal waters, as it were, in exile on the sea, because they're trying to stay free from the rule of a despot who rules on land, and if they'd stayed on land, they would, you know, come under his dominion and have to give up their son for his army, and yada yada yada. So they're trying to live free on the seas, and during a routine mission where they're trying, where the girl and a friend of hers are trying to gather food, she is hoodwinked by an attractive young soldier who she thinks might be a friend, but ends up betraying her, and her family is all killed. And so, of course, much like with the boy in The Flame in the Mist, it seems like revenge is on their minds now. 4 years later, she has amassed with her friend a all-girls pirate crew of their own to take down the soldiers and the despot and, you know, all of it. And so we see a battle, we kind of get to know a couple of the girls in the crew. It's really it's too vague really to get to know anyone too well. And then there's a lot of descriptions of a sea battle, which makes me think I don't have a lot of nautical knowledge. And it ends with her friend being taken captive, and that's where the segment ends. It's very fast-paced, you know, and it has that hook of revenge. I actually think her brother wasn't killed, but was taken captive, because the author puts a lot of stock into the fact that she and her brother have matching tattoos, so that if they were ever separated, they'd be able to find each other again. So that promise of familial redemption kind of gets to me. But overall, I don't think this is my sort of thing. You know, I already am having a little bit of trouble with the seafaring aspects, and the all-girls revenge crew seems, it's too large. It's like 50 people, so you'll never get a lot of good characters out of that. It's just not a lot of time to build it up, and in general, I don't think revenge really speaks to me. Although family drama does, so who knows. But so that's where I stand, I guess, with Seafire. So finally, I'm on to read my last segment in this book. It is The Smoke Thieves by Sally Green. And I'm back for my last time shift costume change, as it were, because I'm talking about the final segment in this book. It is The Smoke of Thieves by Sally Green. I read 3 chapters. The first chapter, we started out with a fantastical element again, with these two characters led by our female character being these demon hunters who are digging pits and fighting demons and trapping demons, and admittedly it kind of put me to sleep. It could have been also just being tired in general, but I guess this whole demon thing isn't usually my thing. Then we shift to these new other chapters in a fantasy kingdom, although there aren't any other fantastical elements at the moment, but we watched this rather brutal execution from the point of view of a princess whose family is forcing her to watch, maybe as a lesson to make sure that she keeps herself in line, even if she's engaged to be married and doesn't want to say. And then the next chapter is from the perspective of the brother of the person who was executed, and so the two of them are kind of linked because they saw each other and they had a relationship and yada yada yada. And admittedly, I am a big person and a big sucker for drama and melodrama, so those chapters got to be like, ooh, what's going on here? What's going to happen? This seems like the kind of setup where we get backstory chapters for characters who might team up together later, maybe to do some demon hunting, who knows? So there we have it. That's my take on these 6 books in this sampler. I feel like I was rather harsh on a lot of them. I'm not sure if I'll really read any of them, though, other than the 4th Ember in the Ashes book. That one I'm definitely going to read when it comes out. But if I had to pick another fantasy series based off of the other 5 books, well, as much as I disparaged Rebel in the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton, I think I like the political intrigue stuff, like that there's some complications in who's ruling and what their motivations are. That right now is in the backstory, but I feel like once the main character gets out of her dusty town, maybe it'll become more forefront. And there were hints of djinns and, you know, maybe a slow building magic that could seep into there and actually make this a fantasy story. But also, speaking of fantasy, the one that really got me right out the gate with huge fantastical elements was The Reign of the Fallen by Sarah Green Marsh, about necromancers, which is kind of spooky, but, you know, you can't deny it's fantastical, and I think it had the opening line with the most punch in it. Like, the others were a little more sleeper lines than that one. So I guess I've cheated. So I've said that I would pick one, and now I've picked 2 possible fantasy series, YA fantasy series, that I probably won't read, but who knows, I might change my mind if I'm ever in need of reading material in the future. These could spark my interest. So that about covers it for me now. This entire endeavor took a whole lot longer than I was thinking. I started filming on Saturday night and now it is Thursday night. Oh, I just have horrible excuses, you know, just being tired and staying at work late, and had a kind of busy weekend. I spent most of Saturday writing a short story for my writing group, which met on Monday, and it went over pretty well in the writing group, huzzah. And on Sunday I was at the Maryland Renaissance Festival, where I go every year, but on a special note, I went to a book launch at the Maryland Renaissance Festival this year, which I'll talk about more in my book haul at the end of the month. It's been over a week since I posted a video. I feel kind of bad about that, but I have a couple of others in the wings that I hope to squeeze in before October is over and Nano descends on me. I'll mostly be doing just weekly vlog videos during NaNoWriMo. So yeah, that's where I stand now. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little mashup of the page 112 tag and the try a chapter tag. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.